All right, welcome to the next Revelation lesson video. We're going to start back up right at chapter 14. We've alluded quite a bit to chapter 14 because it is that transition chapter between pretty much everything that comes before it in the book and the final thrust of everything that happens right at the end. And so we're going to read chapter 14, Revelation chapter 14. It's 20 verses, which feels like a lot to cover all at once, but everything in 14 is already either covered somehow or it will be covered to come. And so here are the verses of chapter 14. Then I looked, this is right after the beast. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a loud voice from heaven like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. And this is not my notes, and I know I said I'd read all the verses, but this image is sticking out my head really strong right now. The image of at Lord of the Rings where they see light right over the edge of the mountains before help comes and saves the day. And it's kind of what's going on here, because we just learned about the mark of the beast and all the evil things the beast is going to do, and here's the Lamb with his army standing at the top of the mountain. So I just think that's neat. Continuing on at verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. And another angel, a third, followed him, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, Write this, Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap is come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has the authority over the fire. And he called with a loud voice to one who had the sharp sickle, Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth, and gathered the grape harvest of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle, for 1,600 stadia. So even though I do say everything in chapter 14 is covered up to this point and or after this chapter, there's still a few things to just point out and talk about in this chapter. Since the beast has sealed his side with the mark of the beast, that's in the previous chapter, it makes sense that we're reminded of those who are sealed with God's mark. And so there's the army of the mark of the beast, and there's the army of those who are sealed on God's side. And that is very much put right back to back here from chapter 13 to chapter 14. And so it is sort of the movement of the previous section there. But remember that it's going somewhere, though. It's not just going to put these two sides against each other. We're going to see lots and lots happen. Remember also, this is very important, the 144,000, as alluded to earlier, they're here presented as an army. But then also the 144,000 are not just literally 144,000. We talked about earlier in the videos, and if you need to go back and watch those when they are first introduced, the 144,000 are representative of a great multitude from every tribe, language, and nation. And so here they are pictured as a battle who has kept itself spiritually and morally pure so that they can go into God's battle. The angels start to declare the end of the beast's torments. They're going to say that these are over. They start to declare judgment. They start to scream things like, fallen, fallen is Babylon, which is an allusion to Isaiah chapter 21, verse 9, which I had all those verses pulled up. I guess I don't anymore. But let's pull them up again. Revelation 21, verse 9. And I will read that because it is interesting. Starting in verse 8, and behold, here come, or no, then he who saw cried out, upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day, and at my post I am stationed whole nights. And behold, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. And he answered, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. And so that verse is the first time we hear the phrase fallen is Babylon. When we get later on in the book, we're going to see fallen is Babylon. He's going to talk about the destruction of Babylon, the great city, the prostitute. But the thing that would have stuck out in readers' minds the first time they got this, because if this is the first time they're reading it, they don't know the later chapters of Revelation yet. They're going to remember back to Isaiah, where God's talking about his judgment against false gods, specifically carved images and gods. He shatters them to the ground. And so this is, oh yeah, hey, fallen is Babylon. This false prophet and the beast are going down here. Also, just a really random thought is that this is the only passage in the entire Bible, here in Revelation chapter 14, in which angels fly. This is it. There's one time in which they're going up and down stairs or ladder, depending on your translation, and you see seraphim and cherubim fly, but you never see technically an angel fly. Now, some people group in seraphs and cherubs into the overarching concept of angel. But if you're talking just specifically angels themselves, which depending on how you define some terms and depending which passages you're looking at, angels are separate from cherubim and seraphim. They never fly, except for this one passage. The next time we ever hear about someone flying, it's outside the Bible. It's Tertullian, who wrote 100 years later. That's just completely trivial, but it's just, it's just weird. Because we always think of angels flying, but angels are actually never really described much as having wings unless you group cherubim into them. And so, either way. A reason this chapter belongs in the previous section is that it has that this calls for blank statement. Verse 14 here in chapter 40, verse 14 of chapter 14, we have that this calls for blank. Here specifically says this calls for endurance of the saints. And remember in chapter 13 we had the beast shows up and this calls for blank. Then the beast shows up and this calls for blank. One is wisdom and one is endurance. And here we get endurance again. This calls for endurance of the saints. But we get this nice explanatory comment saying what the saints are. And so we are told that saints are those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. So follow God, keep your faith in Jesus, and you are a saint. That's only halfway through the chapter, though, and so maybe just the first half of the chapter belongs with the preceding section, and the next half of the chapter. For example, the preceding verses do summarize a lot of what came before, such as there's worship in heaven, there's those sealed for God, there's the beast's attack against God and his people. But they also, in the preceding verses, allude to what's going to happen next. And so again, chapter 14 really is this transition chapter where we know something's changing in the book. All of this has been laying the groundwork. All of this has been the yeah, we know life on earth is terrible. All of this has been yeah, we know God needs to step in and save the day. Yeah, I know that this is happening. I really hope those promises that we only have to suffer for 3.5 come true. And now we turn the page on chapter 14, and it means, okay, here's when God goes to action. Here is the Lamb with his armies standing on the top of the peak, ready to come down and save the day. That's what's going on as we move from this chapter on into the next chapters. We also get another perspective of Judgment Day. We see Jesus here, this time not described as a lamb, but as one who is seated on a white cloud and who is like a son of man. Jesus referred to himself using this language when he was being, let's say, interviewed by the high priest during his mock trial. I say mock trial is not the right word. His mocking trial, because mock trial usually implies more of a play. This one was just a mockery when they decided that he needed to die. But when he's asked, what he really thinks about himself, Jesus responds with this same phrasing. you will see one like a son of man seated on a cloud. And that made the high priest slap Jesus and scream blasphemy because Jesus referred to himself with these terms from Daniel chapter 7. These terms are talking about God. It's weird, though, because God talks to God in that passage, and it only makes sense if you have a concept of God the Father and God the Son. And God the Son is one like the Son of Man. And Jesus said, oh, by the way, that passage is talking about me to the high priest. So Jesus very clearly said that he was God there. And that is brought up again here in Revelation chapter 14. Jesus is coming on the clouds to save the day here. And then he's going to reap. He reaps the harvest. We see a sickle put in the hands of an angel as well, and the angel reaps a different kind of harvest. So Jesus reaps the harvest that is plentiful, and that is people who are on his side, and an angel comes to reap the winepress, or the grapes for the winepress of God's fury. And so an angel is coming to get things ready with all of that craziness. It's this combination of multiple metaphors, that the whole phrasing of the reaping of the winepress and the fury of the wrath of God. Like, it sounds pretty intense, and it's supposed to be intense, because this is God stepping in to save the day. It's got a drunk stupor due to your pain, the pain of being crushed, the pain of being cut off, your life being poured out. All those metaphors are wrapped up into this. You really don't want to be harvested by the angels. You want to be saved by the Lamb. And that is chapter 14 here. Going on to chapter 15, because we're an 11-minute video. Most of these videos have been more than 20 minutes, so might as well just go on to chapter 15. It is a much shorter chapter. Chapter 15. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last. For with them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire, and also those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. After this I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was opened. And out of the sanctuary came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes around their chests. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. So, 7 angels show up. They will be given golden bowls full of incense and wrath. But first, before they're given the bowls, they're just introduced. And then as soon as they are introduced, we start to hear music, not sung by the angels, but sung by a different group instead. It is these people who have conquered by the blood of the Lamb. Well, it doesn't say that specifically here. They are those who had conquered the beast and his number, is what's said right here in these verses. Some people make a big deal out of the fact that it says they had conquered, which means past tense, particularly if they want the rapture to have already happened. Then they're going to make a big deal about the tense of that verb there. Personally, I don't care about the tense so much because remember, we are in a vision state. And so John, the apostle who's writing this vision down, remember, his timeline is all kinds of wonky. We've already clearly established that by this point in the book. But then also, think about it. He's seeing a vision of what is to him present tense, but is to us future tense. But also, it seems like some of what he saw, for example, like Revelation chapter 12, is to us past tense. And so what's wrong with him seeing a chunk of vision and then writing about what happened in his vision as past tense, which is still to us either past or future tense or maybe present tense? And so unless you have something really grounding it into your timeline, such as the end of time, which is clearly stated twice in this chapter, then maybe this is, the timeline is weird, and don't fixate too much on the tenses that John is giving us in a visionary statement here. He's describing things in the future as he sees them in the present, and so it gets weird, or things in the past as he sees them in the present, or things in his past which are still to us the future. And so when it's a vision, don't get overly fixated on the tenses. Admittedly, though, it does seem like from his perspective, the conquering has already happened. which is odd. So how have they already conquered the beast, and yet the beast has not been destroyed? Well, what if it's they are conquerors? Because remember, to conquer and to overcome throughout the book of Revelation are the same word. They're that word nikao, to do it, to get it done. Get her done, overcome, victorious is the word there. It's victory. And so earlier in the book, we saw that the saints overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives unto death. And so, very possibly, these martyrs who are singing are ones who, or I just gave it away. These saints who are singing are ones who have been martyred. They are martyred because they refused to take the mark of the beast. And by doing so, they have overcome. Because once you are dead, there is no more chance for temptation anymore. And so they won. And now they're singing about how great it is that Jesus is going to come and save the day. Because we are about to get the song that they sing. Before we get into the song that they sing, I just want to see one thing in my notes here. You could theoretically read everything in the book of Revelation up to this point, agree with all of my interpretations, and yet completely disagree with me on my end times views, which my end times views we will talk about when we get to chapter 20, because that's the first time in the book you clearly have to pick a side on which end times view you have if you want to have an interpretation of a handful of verses within that chapter. Here's the good news with Revelation, though. You still don't have to study the trees in order to understand the forest. You don't have to have a particular end times view to get a lot out of the book of Revelation. That said, starting here in chapter 15 and on, your end times views start to matter. From chapters 1 to 14, you can come to the same agreement as someone on interpretative issues that you completely disagree with on which millennial perspective they have. Now, that said, there is a chunk earlier in the book, and I alluded to that with talking about 3.5 plus 3.5 equals 7 years. That part there, you have to interpret it to equal 7 years if you are a dispensationalist. The problem is that dispensationalism is the newest kid on the block when it comes to Christian theology and end times views. And I'm talking like really new, like over 1,500 years younger than the other views. And so that always has some interpretive problems on its own. If you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, it is okay. Let's get back up to speed. We are going through chapter 15. There are saints who have overcome, and they're about to sing a song. And what song do they sing? They sing the song of Moses. And why on earth do they sing the song of Moses? Well, throughout the book of Revelation, Exodus has been alluded to time and time again. So I'm going to pull up the Song of Moses here. I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm definitely not going to sing it, although it's a really cool song, and I wish we'd have more worship songs like it. But it's in Exodus chapter 15. It begins with, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host, he cast into the sea, and his chosen officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power, your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow your adversaries. You send out your fury, and it consumes them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up, the floods stood up in a heap, the deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I'll pursue, I'll overtake, I'll divide the spoil, my desire will have its fill of them. I'll draw my sword, my hand will destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them, and they sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. And it goes on from there, but it's a song of God's victorious power over his and his people's enemies. And it's a cool song. And it says they sing that, and then they sing this other song, the song that we just saw here. Just are you, a holy one, who is and who was. Oh no, that's chapter 61. Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. And so the saints are singing about how God is going to destroy his enemies because he's just and he's righteous. And that's what's happening. And then we see the sanctuary to the tent of witness. That's another allusion to Exodus. The sanctuary is the place where God met with Moses. And so throughout Revelation, as I said earlier, there are these allusions to Exodus because these are the connections that God is trying to draw. He's saying, I save my people. You may feel like you're under attack right now, and Revelation is going to feel like you're under attack, but God saves his people. The Israelites panicked too, but they did not need to. You don't need to panic either. And if you keep panicking, you might die in the wilderness. Don't panic. It's just 3.5 years. That's the concepts that are going through your mind, or at least they're supposed to be going through your mind as you read this. Now, no one is allowed to enter into the tent of witness to get to meet with God until the plagues are finished, is what it says here. But the good news is that these are the last plagues. These 7 angels are given 7 bowls of wrath, and they are going to do the last plagues. The interesting thing is that these angels play dress up. And I don't want to belittle what the angels are doing, but they are dressing up like a different character. They're not dressed up like angels. They're dressed up like priests from the Torah. And in the book of Leviticus, when it describes what the priests are supposed to be wearing, that's how these angels are dressed up. So the question is, why are these angels dressing up like priests? And it's not to be God's special kind of messengers here, but it's to allude to the work of the temple. A particular work of the temple, because there's actually a couple different types of bowls of incense, and one particular bowl, the proper specific word used here in Revelation, is a special bowl. This bowl is set aside for the purpose of getting junk and gross stuff out of the temple. Now, there were no bathrooms in the temple complex. That would be gross. It'd be unclean. Literally unclean in multiple ways, spiritually and kosher laws, stuff like that. But it would be unclean in the idea, or there are things that are unclean that don't get burned up. Like there's ashes. Like after the fire of a sacrifice goes up, there's ashes left over. And so they'd fill these particular bowls with the ashes to get them out of the temple. Certain types of fat in certain types of sacrifices would not get burned up, and they were to be rejected. And so they'd be put in these bowls. And so these bowls are the things where you get stuff out of the temple. You're purifying the temple. And so God's saying he's not going to open the gates of his temple until stuff is purified. You don't have to get to go live with him forever and ever until things are purified. And so we've got these 7 angels. We're going to pour out these 7 bowls of the gross stuff to make sure that God's place, his sacred space, is pure before he lets his people in. And that's sort of the rest of the book. He's going to clean house before we get to go move into his house, which is really good news. In fact, the cleaning house is going to become so great that by the end, he's going to destroy heaven and earth in order to make a new heavens and new earth. But in the meantime, he is going to clean house with these 7 bowls of wrath, and that is the next chapter, which we are not going to cover in this video, but it will be the next one. And so chapter 16 is when those angels do start dumping the unclean things out of God's place and clearing the world from these things. And it's going to be described as them pouring out and sort of releasing the prayers of the saints is another metaphor / perspective on it, to say, God, what are you going to do about this mess? Do you actually care about the evil in this world? And God dumping out those bowls of wrath is him saying, yeah, I do. It's time to clean house. I look forward to that day, but if you're not on God's side, it will be a rough day. So conquer instead. Thank you for watching this video.